welcome to today's seminar on the new normal, and please do note the question marks behind new and normal. Before I say a bit more about the seminar and the background, can I quickly remind everyone that today's webinar is being recorded and that the recording will be published via social media channels and on our website. So just that you are aware of this. The seminar series that this webinar is part of is situated within the annual theme of the IHS, which deals with resilience, a new normal. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused and continues to cause severe disruptions to our personal lives, to our society, to our political and economic system. It's made us aware how fragile this construct is that we call normality. So now we're in May 2022, and the incident numbers are currently down. And while we don't know what will happen in the fall, the pandemic is, at least for now, giving us a short breather. We're back to normal, it seems, at least for now. But are we? And if yes, in what way are we back to normal? Are we just back in the office? Or has normality really re-established itself? And that opens another question. Should we even just go back to normal? Or do we need to define and establish a new normality? Those are the questions that we want to explore today, and also in the other events throughout the year. I'm therefore very, very happy to introduce Robert Braun, our speaker today. Robert is a senior researcher at the IHS. He studied philosophy of arts and history at the University of Budapest and at Rutgers. He has a PhD in philosophy and a habilitation in sociology. Robert is in his research is mainly interested in the politics of societal transformation and the politics of autonomous mobility in particular. He's published widely on responsible research and innovation processes and on technology transitions to autonomous, connected and electric mobilities. I especially recommend his latest two books, the first one on corporate stakeholder democracy and a just recently published book on post-automobility futures that he co-authored with IHS fellow Richard Rendell. Thank you very, very much, Robert, for sharing your thoughts, your very critical thoughts, I might advertise, for sharing them with us today. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining. Katrin was kind enough to share a few of her questions, but I'm a philosopher, so none of these will be answered, of course. I'm not in the business of the practicalities of life. So I'll try to answer my own question. That's what philosophers do most of the time. Katrin seemed to have missed one question mark, because it was not only the new and the normal, but also the was question marked. So anyway, without further ado, as Katrin said, let me share my screen. I hope you do see my screen now, full screen. And so I'll start what I was planning to tell you. So this talk is titled The New Normal. So it goes. So this is what I'll be talking about today. When I was asked to talk about the new normal, actually, I had no clue what I wanted to say, because I know nothing about neither normal nor the new one. But lucky, I have just read, when I was asked, David Gerber's Malinowski lectures from 2012, as far as I recall, about bureaucratic violence. And violence, I know a lot about. So I thought, why don't I try to interpret to you the new normal through violence. So this is what I'll be talking about today. I'll try to discuss the normal, the new normal, and whether it could be otherwise. And in between, I'll break up for lessons for violence. I'll talk for 40 minutes, and then we'll have questions, I hope. At least that's my ambition. So this is what I do, and I promise I won't use much philosophy talk, but this I have to. So what I do is what I call the political ontology of violence. I'm working at the confluence of science, technology, society studies, and automobility studies. And my primary interest is in power violence, or rather, how the world is made through or by power violence. I assume, or I profess, that automobility is an enduring, permanent global space wherein violence has become normalized. Thus, automobility has very little to do with the car, but more importantly, it's a specific construct of conditions of possibility for life or being by multiple forms of violence: physical, slow, epistemic, and infrastructural. And this is what I will try to provide as context for both the normal and the new normal. My guiding thought will be a quote from Martin Heidegger, which he didn't really explicate, but I want you to remember it. It goes like this: violence has long been done to the thingliness of the thing, and that thinking has had something to do with it. So this will be guiding my presentation today. And here is the spoiler. When I think of the new normal, I will claim that the new normal is perpetuating multiple forms of violence by suggesting that things are or can be otherwise, while actually they remain the same. So I will suggest that instead of the new normal or its correlate, the abnormal, we should actually consider the agnormal. And this is not a mistake in spelling. This is a form of ignorance that displaces the human from the center of knowledge that is assumed to be the normal. And I'll try, at least with my limited philosophical skills, to suggest how this could be done. So now you can turn off. This is all what I'll be talking about. You know it all. As a philosopher, I started to try to understand the normal in its Greek origins. And of course, it originates from the word gnomon, which is in Greek, meaning what or who discerns or instructs. Its plural, funnily, is the teeth that mark the age of a horse or a mule in Greek, but literally it means one that discerns or examines, interprets, or an expert. Its root is gignoschein, which is to come to know. And this, of course, the word you know, is coming from gno or gnosis, that is to know. In modern language, it's the vertical shaft, as you see on the picture, that's added that tells the time by the shadow it casts, or it is a figure that's added to a given other figure that makes a larger figure the same shape, or even more colloquially, the gnomon is the carpenter's square. It is an L-shaped tool with its two sides at right angles that help build houses. So our normal is actually the gnomos, the gnomon. So the normal is, of course, of knowledge. And what is the utmost form of modern knowledge? It is, of course, science. So I assume that the normal is actually, in our modern age, is science or of science, which is, of course, a political ontology. It originates in the timely response to a very specific historical challenge. So here is your crisis or resilience, because it originates in the political, social, and theological chaos that embodied in the 30 Years' War. It's not a way of knowing, but it is a way of creating the world. It is the Cartesian, from Descartes, program for philosophy that actually swept aside the reasonable certainties and hesitations of the 16th century skeptics in favor of a new mathematical kind of rational certainty and proof. As Galileo famously said, the language of the universe is, or the big book of the universe is written in the language of mathematics. And the ambition was to build a secure body of human knowledge using rationally validated methods. This was framing basic theories around ideas whose merits were clear, distinct, and certain, and it was using demonstrable arguments having the necessity of mostly geometrical proofs. However, this was not how we understood the world, but this was how, after the conflicting years of the 30 Years' War, the devastation across Europe, that was the world at the time, some certainty was to be seen. However, as we know from Virilio, Paul Virilio, another philosopher from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, in his book, The Original Accident, he wrote about technology mainly, that when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you also invent the plane crash. And when you invent electricity, you also invent electrocution. This is what he called the integral accident. So the accident that is the opposite is always integral to what you invent. I think that the same applies to knowledge. So when you invent knowledge, as they invented, and I willfully say so, when they invent the modern form of knowledge, they also invented the modern form of ignorance. So when you commit to science, you also commit actually to the science of ignorance. This is what the science of ignorance is. It's called agnotology. And this is part of making the normal. It is the politics of the modern ontology that is science. The definition goes of agnotology as politically induced ignorance or doubt by the use and misuse of science. It was famously kind of invented by Robert Proctor in his book on tobacco, proving that mainly tobacco manufacturers, but others were using science to frame tobacco not as something that is lethal, but not also occluding the lethality, but using science to cast doubt about the certainty of this case of the lethality of smoking. So there are different methods of agnotology: over-scientification, funding relevant research to overflood the system, building alternative scientific institutions that would bring about alternative but also well-researched facts, unintended byproduction, or simply more research, which is always to be had when aiming for not allowing a problem to be scientifically settled. And based on Proctor, others have been working on climate agnotology, like Naomi Oreskes, or actually the agnotology of the orgasm, like Tauna did, who had a wonderful study about how women were occluded in medical literature. The clitoris was simply not represented for hundreds of years as part of the vagina. So orgasm, female orgasm was occluded And this was all in medical books up until the 60s and 70s of the last century. And the same applies to cancer research. So, as said, the integral accident of science is also agnotology. So, what is the normal? The normal, modern knowledge, is the integral accident. It is a Cartesian world that defines the knowing human subject and the knowable world. It is a humanist anthropology that politicizes othering. And this is constituted by power, violence, my favorite subject. This is, of course, not new. Technology has created the enframed human other, as Heidegger told us. Colonialism has created the less rational human other, as Sylvia Winter taught us. And capitalism has created the exploited human other, as we read in Marx. And most of all, modernism, our era, has created the abnormal human other, as we could have read from Michel Foucault's work. So let me pause for a second. What's the lesson for violence? The lesson is that modern science is an outcome of violence. The normal, as we read in Gnomon, instructs a way of seeing into reality by violently suppressing other ways of seeing. This is the agnotology part. This creates the entities that see. In modern science, that who instructs, that who sees, is of course the human. Human instruction, that is the one who instructs, involves othering, the indigenous, the desubjectified, the exploited, the mad. So modern science, actually, othering is normalized. Violence is normalized. So the normal, the human, and the violent are intricately connected. And so here is the question from the lesson, and this is, of course, an STS-inspired question. Could it be otherwise? So our era, as Katrin obviously said, is wrought with disruption and crisis. There are multiple disruptions and crises. I may even venture saying that this is the late modern human condition. Crisis of inequality, the financial crisis of 2008-9, climate emergency, the pandemic, and lately the war that is probably a world war in the making. So disruption and crisis is actually our being in the age of the Anthropocene. So here's my bifurcation for disruption and crisis. Disruption can mean that they're not simply an articulation of an empirical reality, but it is a way of constituting that reality. Ordinary routines of social life are open to doubt. The sanctions of existing power relations are uncertain or temporarily or finally suspended, and new possibilities become thinkable. Such events are modes of normative reinterpretation that revise the ways in which normality, as Katrin has alluded to, can be determined and evaluated, can be redetermined and re-evaluated. And this may give rise to new ways of thinking and feeling about what things mean and how our social order should proceed. Othering may be seen as detrimental to the sense of community, solidarity, and a more inclusive politics of knowledge. This is one option. However, crises also undermine abiding certainties and call for a return to normalcy, throw social meaning into disarray, fracturing settled accounts of the we. So this challenges elites whose social contributions are most important, they think, and question how to speak about causes and effects. So ideas that had an incipient but marginal presence in pre-crisis thinking, think of post-truth, might begin to be taken seriously. Structural disruption gives rise to returning to and strengthening traditional thinking and feelings about what things are and how in our social political order we should proceed. So another option is othering may be seen as the way to save the me and the mostly unearned privileges the I enjoys. So in disruptions and crises, the new normal is evoked. It won't surprise you that the new normal is another form of the integral accident. To paraphrase Virilio, when you invent the world, you also invent the world wreck. So here is the bifurcation again. It, the new normal, promises an opportunity for paradigm change, or in my language, excuse my French, the ontopolitical shift, or as the elites would think, anchor the world and the privileged in doing the same. Look at this title, for instance, by the Pew Research Center. Experts say the title goes, "The new normal of 2025 will be far more tech-driven, presenting more big challenges." So the new normal is actually anchoring the world and the privileged in doing more of the same. Let me bring you some examples of the discourse of the new normal. Science suggests a new future certainty, and with this, the integral accident, that is the new future agnotology. So here are three examples: smart city, electric and autonomous mobility, and data space, all stemming from my research. So what does smart city stand for? Smart city stands for data as the representation of the real. However, of course, this occludes what is cooked, transformed, omitted, delayed in data. So what you get actually is not smart, but a new city that is the continuation of the old city, that is the representation of the real in new clothes. Electric and autonomous mobility. Electrification as a weighing. What does this mean? Although there are no fumes coming out from the electric cars, but the problem is pushed away. Of course, that electricity has to be made, created somewhere. The batteries, lithium ion has to be mined, extracted somewhere else. Batteries lose 27% of their electricity, and automation, or the autonomous car, that solves the so-called driver problem. 93%, they say, of accidents are caused by the human, except that this 93% is a very specific way of looking at accidents. It's called mainly by the Agnotology of safety research. It's called the driver technology and environment problem, in which most of the research finds that 93% of the cases it's the human who is at fault, and autonomous mobility offers to solve this. Data space creates, as it is proclaimed, seamless flow of interoperable data, but it also occludes non-datafiable realities. So what I argue is that the new normal is pretty much the old gnomon. Change by doing more of the same. When it's about the smart city, it's actually big tech selling smartification as a new way to exploit and extract financial value. When it is about electric and autonomous mobility, the new normal is actually big auto selling electrification and automation to occlude automobility violence. And the old gnomon in data space is big advisory selling datafication to generate value from the new oil, as they call, that is data. So again, let's pause for a second. So what's the lesson for violence? I argue that modern science is of multiple forms of violence. This won't surprise you. Physical violence in accidents like our automobility, slow violence like climate change, epistemic violence as continued colonization of the global south, for instance, through surveying. So the new normal instructs, like in the gnomon, an old way of seeing into reality by actually violently suppressing other possible ways of seeing. This is not new. This has been done in the old normal just as much as it is being done in the new normal. So who instructs is still the Western white male human. The normal, the Western male human, and violence remain intricately connected. So what I try to ask again, could it be otherwise? And I think it could. So let me suggest, instead of the new normal, something different. There is no spelling mistake. What I will suggest is the agnormal. So what is the agnormal? Of course, it comes from the word agnosis, which was originally found out by Thomas Henry Huxley, who is a self-taught biologist or anthropologist. This is his talk to the Metaphysical Society in 1869. And instead of interpreting it, because I find it amazingly to the point, let me read it out to you. Every variety of philosophical and theological opinion was represented there and expressed itself with entire openness. Most of my colleagues were ists of one sort or another, and however kind and friendly they might be, I, the man without the rag of a label to cover himself with, could not fail to have some of the uneasy feelings which must have beset the historical fox when, after leaving the trap in which his tail remained, he presented himself to his normally elongated companions. So I took thought and invented what I conceived to be the appropriate title of agnostic. It came into my head as suggestively antithetic to the Gnostic of the church history, who professed to know so much about the very things of which I was ignorant. And I took the earliest opportunity of parodying it at our society to show that I, too, had a tail, like the other foxes. That is the history of the origin of the terms agnostic and agnosticism. So the abnormal is the not knowing. To paraphrase Huxley, it came into my head as suggestively antithetic to the Gnostic of the human of history, who professed to know so much about the very things of which I was so ignorant. So the emphasis here is not on knowledge, but the knower. That is, I think, the problem. So in this new normal, that is the abnormal, I suggest that this could aid a post-humanist philosophy. This realizes that the human is enmeshed and dependent on the environment. The human moves to action through interactions that generate effects, habits, and embodied reason, possessing nothing that is uniquely human, but is made up of a larger becoming meta-object that is the Earth. So, and of course you see Donna Haraway on the picture. This means for me to decolonize the normal. So the abnormal, I suggest, is a way to decolonize the normal. So how can we create the abnormal? I think that insurrection and change, the real one, always depended on unexpected alliances between entities. However, as I learned from my readings in history, unexpected alliances were never enough. actually political entities ready for such new alliances had to be created. Blacks, indigenous peoples, women, children did not exist as political entities before they were made and then made ready for such unexpected alliances. So, what I'm trying to suggest is let's create such political entities with which we will create those alliances that will make up the abnormal. And this is actually not very new. Christopher Stone already in the 70s suggested that trees should have legal standing. We should create natural entities, rivers, trees as legal objects. Up until now, and this is of course yet not accepted even in America by the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is busy with abolishing Roe versus Wade instead of really addressing the pertinent problems of the abnormal. So he suggested that such entities should not be treated as in danger because the human is impacted by the change of the flow of the river or by the diminishing of the woods that are made up by trees. But these entities have legal standing on their own, in their own being. Or Donna Haraway suggested in the Cyborg Manifesto that cyborgs can be political entities. And Timothy Morton, in his book on hyperobjects, suggests that any object whatsoever can be a political entity that we can form alliances with. So how to create the abnormal? We have to create new political entities that are yet maybe seemingly absurd, but unimaginable, and with them we should form those unexpected alliances that will make the insurrection. So let me end with what are the lessons for violence of this abnormal utopia? I think that to do away with violence, we need to rethink thinking and thinking. Think of the quote by Heidegger, the violence of human thinking. That's what we have to decenter. So my suggestion for the abnormal decenters the human and creates a level playing field for all entities, human, non-human, and inanimate, to think. Thus, by these many who think, many instruct, and humans withdraw from the violence of creating the world by the gnomon that they claim to be the normal. I argue that othering, the violent degradation of the self of the other, is so 20th century. I argue it could be otherwise. I think violence matters. I think the other matters. So instead of always a new normal, a continuous, modern, and capitalist utopia, I think and I suggest the abnormal serves humans and also our fellow terrestrials much better. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Robert, for a difficult topic, but I think a very, very thought-provoking talk. Thank you very much. I would now like to open the floor to questions, comments, criticism, whatever you have in store for Robert. And it would be most helpful if you could maybe just use the raise your hand feature so that I can, because I can't see everyone on screen, so I won't be able to see you if you just raise your hand in real life. Does someone have a question or a comment for Robert?
Everything was so clear, so straightforward.
I think everyone is still probably still digesting what you said. We do have a question from Erich. Erich, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Robert. Provocative is not otherwise expected. My question is, how do you imagine such a coalition between human actors and non-human actors, these new entities you have been talking about? Who would be the spokesperson for a river or a mountain or a habitat or a bird? Because I cannot imagine, would that be a soothsayer? Would it be a medium? I don't know who is a legitimate spokesperson for a river?
Thank you, Eric.
Or is it for instance Greenpeace?
I think this is an excellent question, and let me start with the bifurcation again. Yes, anyone can be a spokesperson, whoever is accepted as legitimate, and this is obviously not new. One of the criticism, of course, for the original Stone argument, can trees have legal standing, was that trees can't talk. But this is the case with children, or in court, or companies. They have spokespersons, and there are ways to legitimately determine who can be a spokesperson. The simplest is whoever is accepted as such. But there is another way of answering this. Maybe in this new politics, speaking is not the main medium. There's a wonderful new book by Anna-Marie Moll, Eating in Theory. And one of her adversaries in this book is, of course, Hannah Arendt. And her concept, Arendt's concept of speaking as action, and the Greek ideal of the agora, where politics actually happened. And so maybe politics, that new insurrection that I was also speaking about, is not achieved by speaking. So maybe it's not spokespersons whom we need, but something else. But as I said in the beginning, that's not my task. I can give you the frame, and then you work out the details.
Thank you, Robert. Since I don't have another hand raised, I'll abuse my position and ask you on that very same subject, because the same question as the one that Erich had popped up. I think we and Stone talks about this in his book in the introduction. We have a long history of providing new entities with legal standing, with legal rights. So it isn't such a far-fetched idea to come up with no entities that can be considered to have rights and to give them rights. But I think that there is a big difference between being given a voice and actually having a voice. I think you're circumnavigating a bit too quickly around the whole issue of not being able to speak. Yes, children usually aren't able to speak before court. And so why should a tree or why must a tree be able to speak before court? But doesn't that put us square back into a situation where we do not dehumanize our world, but where we sort of rehumanize even those new entities that are then given legal standing, because the river cannot form on its own an alliance, because it cannot speak, it cannot demonstrate, it cannot fight for its rights. It needs humans to do so. And so we are back in a world where humans think for and speak for all of these entities that have rights. And how do we sort of dehumanize this process, dehumanize in the way that you have meant it?
Maybe if there are other questions, we can collect them, but I'm happy to answer if there is no other question along these lines.
I don't have any raised hands at the moment, but if there is anyone who wants to come in on this topic, make yourself known.
Okay, so
Go
I'll
ahead.
give it a go. So, well, it's always hard to imagine something that we can't yet imagine, and I think this is what we're talking about here. I think what I'm trying to suggest, obviously this is not only me doing so, is to move away from our regular way of human-centered politics. And not only is it speaking that is at the center of this human-centered politics, but also the law, also the court. So what I'm trying to conceptualize is, let's call it a paradigm change. Let's call it, I don't want to use philosophical terms, let's call it a new ontology, nothing less than the scientific revolution, as it was called in the 17th century. Before, it was the church who determined. It was actually a world that was made by unseen and unseeable entities who knew it all. These were the gods. And we, the humans, before the 17th century, were at the mercy. We did not have rights. We did not have even a soul. We did not have life. Because it was all preordained and predetermined. And then came Galileo, and then came Copernicus, and came a new way of seeing, as Kuhn says. And then we acquired all these political rights to speak, to control our life, to know the world, etc. And then through knowing, to control the world. So as in the 13th century, for someone to imagine the world of the 18th century and far beyond was impossible, so it is for us to imagine this abnormal, to imagine that we can think or be otherwise, in which politics is not centering around talking, that politics is not centering around representation, but another way of being. There's another wonderful book by a guy called Cohn, titled "How the Forest Speaks." And it's obviously a book of anthropology trying to understand indigenous thinking, and try to understand how the indigenous peoples of the Amazonas or in Ecuador actually live together with the trees, the animals. They don't represent the trees and the animals, but they share something. Their world is common, and it's not a negotiation process. It's not an argumentation about how the world is or who is in power, but it's a totally different form of life. And I think, and this is what I'm trying to suggest, again, with many others, that if we take these disruptions seriously, then we should actually imagine what we can't yet imagine.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there's a lot more that we can discuss about that. Erich, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, somebody who who provokes has to be provoked or back. So what's new here about this? I mean, because you were referring to religion. God doesn't have a voice. God doesn't speak. It's the churches or whoever who says this is the voice of God and interpret it. So I would say it's a human making. Also, nature doesn't speak, science doesn't speak. So what's new? You just invoke a new actor, except you can show us a way beyond talking, who humans speak for, or a certain group of a certain group of people are speaking for. So then they are not speaking for God. They're not speaking for the virus or the nature. They are speaking for the river. They are speaking for the planet and are claiming rights. So what's new here?
I think there is a lot new here, but you're now reinterpreting the imaginary of religion from what you know after the scientific revolution. I don't think that if you went back to the 12th century, then if you asked someone on the street, he or she would have said it's only humans who think all this up. It was their way of life. This was the world in which they lived. Those entities that you now claim to have been made up by humans were actually very real. Gods were real. They were in a position of power, and they actually instructed, gnomon, they instructed how the world is. And this was not thought up by that 12th century individual, but it was the life he lived or she lived in. And I see that you don't want to let speaking go, but you know, speaking this language is a very human endeavor. There may be other ways of speaking. There may be other languages. Maybe viruses communicate. We do know that dogs and dolphins, other animals, do communicate. They do have a language. Maybe trees do too. So again, it's extremely hard to imagine that there are multiple worlds, and the world of the tree, the world of the river, the world of the dog, my dog Beaujolais, is a very different world. It's a parallel world. It is a different world. So we actually live in multiple ontologies, multiple worlds at the same time. One is the world of Beaujolais, and the other is the world of Eric. And they do not share this world, actually. And thus, there is no communication. Let me give you another example that kind of bothers me. One of the big questions of humankind is there intelligent life in the universe? And we are looking for both life and intelligence as we imagine it to be. This intelligence, this life, I'm pretty sure does not exist anywhere else, because this is our world. This is our universe. It's not the universe. And that's why there is a question mark at the "the." We cannot imagine multiple worlds. We cannot imagine that multiple worlds exist at the same time. And this is not science fiction. This is what I believe in. The tree is a world, the human is the world, and that's what we need to do away with if we actually want to address the abnormal that is required to address, as the European Commission calls, the grand challenges of our time. Because otherwise, we're just doing more of the same. And in 20 years, in 100 years, in 1,000 years, we'll realize it was not enough. But that will be probably somewhat, maybe a little bit too late.
Thank you. When it comes to multiple worlds or multiple universes, there are actually some people who can imagine that very well. Scientists, nonetheless, look at quantum mechanics. I have a question from chat. Sorry, no, it's gone. And it's by, sorry, Indrani Mahapatra. The question is, I have a thought. Is there a reason that the utopia picture was devoid of life and had only concrete structures?
Of course, I can make up one, but no.
No.
It was just a picture I liked. So there is no intention of this picture as opposed to many others I could have chosen. It's just an illustration, or maybe this is how my mind speaks. But maybe returning to quantum, it's actually not quantum mechanics, but quantum theory that is more interesting, because quantum theory actually suggests exactly the same thing that I am trying to say here. Yes, it is something.
Interpretation of quantum theory, yeah.
Oh, well, before quantum theory, void of the Copenhagen Compromise, because what quantum theory tells us, and there's a wonderful book by Rovelli, The Order of Time, and please read it, because it's a quantum physicist explaining quantum physics in ordinary language. But what quantum theory tells us is that time and space are also human constructs. And this is something we can't imagine, because we live in space and we live in time. And also, another thing that we can't imagine is how is it possible that one entity is both wave and particle at the same time until we observe it. But once we have observed it, it will be particle and it will be wave backwards and not only forwards from our observation. This is mind-boggling, and it is, because our human mind is of a human kind. And so that's why the Copenhagen Compromise, because even smarter men than me, Einstein and others, couldn't understand it. Because this was impossible, because also they were humans. They could only imagine what they could imagine. And this was unimaginable. Quantum mechanics works, and that was enough for them. While the language or the book of the universe is not written in the language of mathematics, their way of thinking was. Therefore, they could explain away human thinking through mathematics. Anyway, so this all, I think, suggests that in order to try to get out from the traps that we have created for ourselves in the Anthropocene, maybe we should at least begin or try to imagine what we cannot yet imagine. And one step at a time, would be to imagine these others entities as political subjects. And mind you, women were not imagined as political subjects before they were imagined. And probably if we went back to the 17th century and somebody would have said that women have a voice or should have a voice or should speak in politics, they would have said, this is absurd. This is unimaginable. Women cannot be part of politics. They're not imagined as political entities, and so on and so on.
But of course, and this brings us full circle back to how Erich started the conversation, women have voices. The suffragettes had very, very loud voices. I inadvertently started a conversation about quantum theory, which I didn't want to, unless someone else wants to come in on it, but I can only second Robert's book suggestion. It's a fascinating and for me absolutely mind-boggling topic. I would like to, unless there's another question from the audience. I don't see one at the moment. Can I change track completely at this point? Because I have an absolutely different question which goes in a very different direction. At the beginning of your talk, you were also, or maybe it would be good if you explained this a bit more. It seemed as if you were rather critical with modern science, or at least with how modern science is organized. And sort of my very concrete question here is thinking back and taking us back to our current situation with the COVID pandemic. As you all know, never before, I think, well, I won't go that far, but the visibility of scientists, not only in the public debate, but also beyond, and the influence they've had on public debate and on also on political decisions, was maybe not unprecedented, but at least remarkable over the pandemic. And that includes not only epidemiologists or virologists or other health professionals and experts, but it includes a whole range of experts from different disciplines. So given your thesis, sort of how do you see this strong involvement of and the strong dependence on science and scientists during the pandemic by the political system? Because there's also quite a lot of criticism of that coming from within society.
Thank you for the question, because I thought that this would be the most thought-provoking part of the talk. While I'm not actually critical of science, I'm just referring to Stephen Toulmin's work. And I just think that science is not a description of how the world actually is, but science is a political ideology. And it is a very specific and hegemonic political ideology that was born in the 17th century in what we now call the scientific revolution, which brought about, instead of a transcendental space, spatialized transcendence, and then brought about technology and the Industrial Revolution and the like. As for the pandemic, I can only answer as a layperson. I'm obviously no expert in that. But I see that this political ideology is running its course and has its limits. And what I'm trying to suggest, again with others, is partly taking note of science as a political ideology is the gnomon. It is the normal. It is the creation of a very specific order in society, political order, in which a group of people who are called experts, who are called scientists, with a very specific way of seeing, dominate the public discourse. And a lot of others, for a number of reasons, feel disenfranchised. And I think the pandemic is or was a case in point. While probably this political ideology that is science has saved a lot of people, me included, as someone who was ready to get vaccinated, it has also caused innumerable suffering. Suffering that is unforeseeable, unanticipatable. We don't know the impact of the lockdowns, etc. I remember us looking at these maps of the number of infections, never actually knowing what these numbers were telling us, but politicians being hystericized into lockdowns and other extremely strong measures. So maybe, again, instead of the new normal that is within this frame of a scientific worldview, a new political ontology can be thought up. And for this, I'm suggesting Agnormal to think about decolonizing our way of thinking, or way of seeing rather, and also to try to imagine other political subjects with whom we can make those unexpected alliances that could turn around and bring about a new political ideology. Don't ask me what this political ideology can be, because who am I to tell? Again, nobody in the 16th or 17th century could have told what actually modern science will be. But one of the other guiding principles or guiding writers is a totally forgotten Austrian for me, Paul Feyerabend. Much of what I'm trying to say was already said by him. He was a physicist, as you know, who turned a historian or philosopher of science, and in Against Method, he actually argues that the scientific method is just one political way of addressing the world. His relativism was not of the world, but rather of knowing, because he dealt with epistemology, as philosophers call it. But I think he opened up a lot into which we have to step in and continue. It is very sad for me that his work is almost totally forgotten, even in America, in Austria.
Thank you so much. Robert, I believe that was a wonderful final statement, unless someone is now very, very quick with the hands up button. No, I don't see any more. I want to thank everyone for coming, for attending. Claudia has been very active of linking other events that we're organizing in this and other series in the chat. Do have a look whether you find something interesting. And in particular, Robert, I want to thank you for your talk and for your for your difficult and thought-provoking arguments. The two of us have to talk. There's a lot that we still need to discuss, I think. So thank you so much, and hopefully we can continue this at some point. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and I hope I see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.